Imagine this. You wake up tomorrow, and every country on Earth, the United States, China, Japan, every nation large and small has paid off its debt. Trillions wiped clean, no bonds, no interest, no obligations. The headlines call it a miracle. Economists call it the end of history. But by sunset, the celebration would already be over because the world would have no idea how to function. We talk about debt as if it's a disease, something to cure. But what if it's closer to oxygen, invisible, necessary, and fatal to remove? Global debt isn't just a number, it's the bloodstream of the modern world. Governments borrow to fund armies and hospitals. Corporations borrow to build factories and create jobs. Families borrow to buy homes and send children to school. Behind every city skyline, every road, every paycheck, there's a promise to pay later. So what happens if that promise suddenly disappears? Bonds worth trillions would vanish from the balance sheets of banks, pension funds, and insurance companies. The safest assets in existence, government debt, would no longer exist. The financial system would lose its anchor. Interest rates, the invisible price of risk, would have nothing to measure. For ordinary people, it would start quietly. Banks would freeze lending. Markets would stall. With no government bonds to buy, investors would have nowhere safe to park money. Stock markets would crash under the weight of confusion. Retirement funds would evaporate. Because in our world, someone's debt is always someone else's income. Erase the debt, and you erase both. For centuries, debt has been humanity's favorite illusion, the idea that we can borrow from the future to live better today. But that illusion built civilization itself. Without it, governments wouldn't function, and markets wouldn't move. So when people ask, what if every country paid off its debt tomorrow? The answer is simple: it would not be the dawn of a new world. It would be the collapse of the old one. To understand why paying off all debt would destroy the world, you first have to understand what debt really is. It isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It's civilization's oldest invention, older than money, older than banks, older than nations themselves. Debt is trust in motion. It's the belief that the future will exist, and that someone in that future will keep a promise made today. Long before the first coins were struck, people traded on credit: grain owed after harvest, labor owed after a favor, protection owed after loyalty. Every great empire, from Mesopotamia to modern America, was built not just on armies and gold, but on debt. When the Dutch financed their wars against Spain, they did it by selling bonds. When Britain conquered half the world, it did it on borrowed money. The United States didn't win the 20th century by saving, it won by spending. Railroads, highways, the internet, all born from borrowed capital. Every revolution in history has been written in IOUs. Debt made nations powerful because it turned time into a resource. It allowed the future to be harvested early, to build now and pay later. It became the hidden engine of growth, spinning beneath the surface of progress. And yet, this same engine chained the world to a paradox. The more we borrowed, the more stable things became, until stability itself depended on never stopping. The global economy is now a machine built on promises that can never be fully kept, only renewed. So when people dream of a debt-free world, they imagine peace. But what they're really imagining is stillness. Without borrowing, governments can't invest, companies can't expand, families can't buy homes. The pulse of credit, the heartbeat of modern life, would stop. Debt isn't a flaw in the system. It is the system. It connects governments to citizens, banks to workers, nations to each other. Erase it, and the web collapses. Every balance sheet becomes meaningless. Every market loses its rhythm. We built our world on promises because they were lighter than gold. But promises, once made, can't simply be erased. They must be carried, or everything built on them falls. Picture it: a world without debt. No treasury bonds, no mortgages, no corporate loans, no credit cards. Every balance sheet suddenly balanced. Every nation free of obligation. For one brief moment, it feels like utopia. But within hours, the world's financial heart would stop beating. Because every IOU erased is also an asset destroyed. The $100,000 you owe the bank on your house is their $100,000 asset. The government bond in your pension fund is your retirement income. The loan that built a factory is the wage that feeds a family. When debt vanishes, so does wealth. Not gradually, instantly. Banks would collapse first. Without government bonds to hold, their balance sheets would turn to dust. The entire structure of deposits, lending, and reserves would crumble. Stock markets would follow. because the foundation beneath them, credit, would be gone. No company could borrow to pay wages, buy materials, or survive a bad quarter. The lights of capitalism would flicker and die. Governments, suddenly debt-free, would discover what debt really meant: control. The power to issue bonds is the power to shape the future, to build, to repair, to respond to crisis. Without borrowing, even the richest states would find themselves paralyzed. Tax revenue alone can't sustain the infrastructure of modern life: the roads, hospitals, armies, and pensions, all financed by debt. And the shock wouldn't stop at borders. Global trade runs on credit. Ships move because someone somewhere extended trust. Without that trust, ports would stall, shipments would rot, and the arteries of globalization would clog overnight. For the first time in centuries, money would mean only what it physically is: paper, metal, or digits with no promise attached. The illusion of liquidity would evaporate, revealing a system that only functioned because everyone agreed to keep borrowing. A debt-free world sounds like freedom, but it's the freedom of a power outage. Everything's still in place, but nothing working. Civilization itself runs on delayed payment. Erase the delay, and you erase the motion. Without IOUs, the world wouldn't start anew. It would simply stop. Every religion dreams of purity, a state free from sin, corruption, and burden. Economists dream of the same thing: a world free from debt. But purity always comes with a cost. And in finance, that cost is motion itself. In a debt-free world, everything looks stable but nothing moves. Governments, stripped of bonds, lose their pulse. There are no yields to anchor interest rates, no safe assets for investors to trust, no mechanism to measure risk. The global financial system depends on one contradiction: that safety is born from debt. Erase it, and even safety disappears. Banks, pension funds, and insurance companies would implode under the weight of perfection. Their balance sheets depend on government bonds, the safest promises in existence. Take those away, and the world's most cautious institutions would have nothing to hold, nothing to lend against, nothing to earn. Every retiree's pension, every insurance policy, every trust fund would collapse in the name of purity, and the shock would ripple through every corner of life. Without borrowing, businesses couldn't expand. Startups would die in infancy. Home ownership would vanish, replaced by cash-only transactions reserved for the wealthy few. Inequality wouldn't shrink, it would explode. Because debt, for all its dangers, is also the ladder that allows the poor to climb. In this imagined world of perfect balance, capitalism would suffocate. Stock markets, once driven by credit-fueled optimism, would stagnate. The global economy would turn into a museum, beautiful, silent, and dead. Even money itself would lose meaning. Interest rates, the heartbeat of finance, would flatten to zero, erasing the distinction between saving and investing, between risk and reward. Without time priced into money, finance becomes static, and static systems decay. The irony is that debt, the thing we most fear, is what keeps the world alive. It forces us to believe in tomorrow, to build what doesn't yet exist, to risk stability for progress. So if every country paid off its debt, the world wouldn't become pure, it would become sterile. And history shows that nothing collapses faster than perfection. When every debt is paid, trust disappears. It sounds backwards, but the link between debt and faith is ancient. Every promise to repay is also a vote of confidence in law, in currency, in the future itself. Take those promises away, and the world loses its invisible glue. Money, after all, is only trust made tangible. A dollar works because someone, somewhere, believes it will still buy something tomorrow. Bonds work because investors believe governments will honor them. The entire global economy is a cathedral built on confidence, and debt is its scripture. So when nations suddenly cleared every ledger, they would also erase belief. There would be no more IOUs, no more contracts tying people to tomorrow, and that means no more reason to cooperate, because in a debt-free world, nobody owes and nobody is owed. The web that binds citizens to governments, workers to employers, and nations to each other would unravel. Global trade would seize up first. Without the trust that credit creates, ships wouldn't sail, goods wouldn't move, currencies wouldn't flow. Each country would retreat into isolation, hoarding what little certainty it still had. The dream of globalization, built on the idea that everyone will eventually pay what they owe, would shatter. markets would lose their compass. With no interest rates, no yield curve, and no debt instruments to anchor value, investors would drift in chaos. Money would have no direction. It would just sit hoarded, stagnant, meaningless, and as economies froze, societies would follow. Because debt is more than finance, it's memory. It's how humanity keeps track of who did what, who earned what, and who deserves what. Erase that record, and fairness dissolves into suspicion. Every transaction becomes a gamble. Every promise feels like a lie. In the end, a world without debt isn't peaceful, it's lonely. Every relationship in the modern world, from a paycheck to a government bond, is built on trust extended across time. Remove that bridge, and we fall into silence. The vacuum after trust isn't calm, it's the sound of the future disappearing. In the end, the greatest debt isn't financial, it's human. Every generation borrows from the next, not just money, but time, stability, and hope. We build cities, economies, and empires on promises our children will one day have to keep. And no matter how much we pay back, that debt never truly clears. When people dream of a debt-free world, they imagine freedom. But what they're really imagining is forgetting. Because debt, at its core, is memory, the record of how we connect across time. Without it, there is no continuity, no accountability, no shared future. The truth is, civilization itself is a form of borrowing. We borrow from nature to fuel our industries. We borrow from workers to create wealth. We borrow from the planet to sustain our comfort. And we borrow from tomorrow to survive today. The interest keeps compounding in climate, inequality, exhaustion. Even nations that pay off their financial debts remain deep in moral ones to the people left behind, to the systems they exploited, to the futures they consumed. Those are the debts no currency can measure and no central bank can erase. And yet, debt is also what keeps us striving. It forces motion. It demands creation. It's the quiet understanding that we owe something to more than just ourselves, to the past that built us, and to the future that depends on us. So what would happen if every country paid off its debt tomorrow? We'd lose the illusion of control, but not the truth of obligation. The ledgers might close, but the balance would remain written not in ink, but in consequence. The world can live without loans. It cannot live without responsibility. Because debt, for all its flaws, is what turns selfishness into cooperation, ambition into progress, time into history. We can cancel every bond, erase every number, and burn every note, but we will still owe to each other, to the earth, to the future we keep spending before it arrives. And that, boss, is the debt humanity will never be able to repay.